Chapter 18 The Evolution of Invertebrate Diversity. Well, we're going to talk about the animal kingdom, basically, is what. All right. So, basically, animals come in one and two groups. Invertebrates, which is what this chapter covers, are animals without a backbone, which make up the majority of the animal kingdom. The next chapter, we'll talk about animals with a backbone, vertebrates, which includes humans. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The majority of the animal kingdom are the insects. And want to talk about diversity? I mean, just butterflies alone. And you take into account beetles and flies, mosquitoes, grass. Oh, there are insects out there that you and I have probably never even seen. It is such a wide, diverse group, and that's what most of the animal kingdom is. Insects. The most successful evolutionary group in the history of this planet. Well, we're going to look at what we know about evolution and diversity of the animal kingdom. But this chapter, we're focusing on two things. Number one, what makes an animal an animal. Number two, we're going to look at the main groups of animals. And nearly most animals are invertebrates. So at the same time, we're looking at the main groups, we're looking at the diversity of invertebrates. All right, first things first. What is an animal? Well, not a plant. All right, animals, like plants, are eukaryotes and are multicellular. But this is where they differ. Animals are multicellular heterotrophs, chemoheterotrophs. They have to eat. Ingestive heterotrophs. They take their food internally and digest it inside of their body. And animal cells do not have walls like plant cells or bacterial cells. They lack cell walls. All right, I mentioned to you animals also use ingestion, taking the food internally. We call it eating. And what separates the animals from the fungi is we're ingestive heterotrophs, but fungi digest their food outside of them and then absorb the digested nutrients. So, yeah, we have two animals here. One's getting ate, the snake. That's some type of python, and that looks like an antelope, perhaps. Wow, I'd hate to get eaten by that. Sure you would too. All right, adult animals are diploid, and they reproduce sexually. Eggs and sperm are produced by meiosis in specialized tissues. Testes of the males, ovaries of the female. And they're the only haploid cells of the animal life cycle. And when the gametes fuse, their nuclear contents, their chromosomes, that is the act of fertilization, forms a diploid cell called a zygote. Once that zygote's formed, it will immediately undergo mitotic cell divisions to form the early embryo called a blastula. Let's take a look at a video, shall we? We're going to look at the sea urchin simply because their development is very similar to humans. That's the 2-cell stage of division. Now the 4-cell stage. This is on the road to, that's a blastula. That's about 100 different cells there. Now, what we're seeing now is the early stages of gastrulation, where one side of the blastula is folding in. That structure is a gastrula, and that establishes three embryonic layers. The three primary embryonic layers, the first three tissues. This is of the embryo. All right, the three layers are the endoderm, which will form the lining of the future digestive tract. The ectoderm forms the skin and nervous system. The mesoderm that gives rise to the muscles and pretty much nearly all the internal organs. Blood, bones, also. All right. Once again, in the early state, the only haploid cells of the animal life cycle are the sperm and the eggs. Sperm meets egg. Well, hold on. Meiosis produces eggs, and meiosis produces sperm. Fertilization, zygote, fertilized egg. Undergoes repeated cell divisions. We call that cleavage. And in this picture, we see the 8-cell stage. And repeated cell divisions lead to a blastula, which is essentially a hollow ball of cells. One side of the blastula folds in to form a gastrula. And at the same time, we see the development of the three primary embryonic germ layers. Ectoderm, which is the outer layer that forms the skin and the nervous system. Inside, we have this layer here, that's your endoderm, future lining of the digestive tract. And this layer in the middle is the mesoderm, most of the internal organs, muscles, bones. And then from this gastrula, and repeated folding and differentiation of cells. One of the first parts of the embryo to form is the digestive tract. And then from the larvae, which undergoes chain metamorphosis, leads to the adult. All right. After the gastrula stage, many animals will develop directly into an adult. Other animals, like the starfish, for example, will go into a larval stage, which is not like the animal, does not necessarily look like the adult stage. This is an immature individual. And the larva will have to undergo a major change in body form called metamorphosis. Insects do this too. Some groups of insects do, not all, but some do. And after metamorphosis, the end result is a sexually capable, mature adult. This is all under control of sets of genes called control box genes, or homeotic. All right. How did animals come about? Well, from a group called uniconts, and I believe that the road to animals started about 1 billion years ago. The oldest accepted fossils remain of animals date to about 500 million years. But after what we recognize as animals, they underwent a wide range of diversification during the Cambrian period. Nearly all the major groups of animals showed up then. Up in Canada is the Burgess Shale. This is a special layer of sedimentary rock which is a storybook. It contains lots of well-preserved millions of fossils. And here's a couple of those fossils found in the Burgess Shale. And this is an idea of what the sea was like about 5.5 500 million years ago. Arthropods dominated. Trilobites, which were arthropods. Even the earliest ancestors of mammals, the chordates. Now, what brought about this explosion of new species all of a sudden, it seemed like? Well, all of a sudden in geologic time. It still took a lot of million years. Well, increase in atmospheric oxygen, predator-prey relationships, and basically the control box genes that you see are pretty much standard in all animals. Pretty much all animals have the same set of control box genes. There's just differences, which led to a variety of body forms. There are about 35 different phyla of animals. We're only going to look at about 9 of them in this book. There's only one phylum that has a backbone. It includes the vertebrates, animals with backbones. Most animals are invertebrates, no backbone. And most of those invertebrates are insects. All right, animals are characterized by basic features: symmetry, the presence of true tissues, number of embryonic layers, talking about the embryos, the body cavity, and the details of their development. And we're going to look at these. There are 2 types of symmetry in animals: radial and bilateral. Humans exhibit bilateral. Radial symmetry is essentially a body plan based on a wheel. And as long as you slice the animal through the center, longitudinal axis, you're always going to get 2 halves. Bilateral animals have a right and left half. And if you slice them down their longitudinal axis, the 2 halves will be mirror images of each other. And they also tend to have a head. We call this cephalization. Radial animals don't seem to have a head of any kind. Look at a starfish. Look at a jellyfish. And most radial animals, jellyfish and sea anemones, only have 2 embryonic layers in their larvae, whereas bilateral animals have mesoderm, whereas these animals do not. And also bilateral animals have a body cavity. Most of them have a body cavity. Radial animals like the jellyfish and sea anemone do not have body cavities as such. 2 basic types of symmetry: the radial, bilateral. All right. 2 embryonic layers. We see this in the jellyfish group, ectoderm and endoderm. They don't have organs or organ systems. Very simple structure. Now, most animals have a 3rd layer, the mesoderm, which gives rise to muscles and organs and organ systems. And within the animals that have 3 embryonic layers, we recognize 2 types, protostome and deuterostome. The distinction here is the first opening of the embryo in the protostomes, that will be the mouth, and the anus will develop later. In the deuterostomes, that first opening is the anus, and the mouth will form later. All right, biologists, coming up with understanding the phylogeny of the different groups, we look at evidence from body plan, fossil record, but the best piece of evidence is DNA sequences, molecular data. And we've come up with some interesting trees. And basically, sponges. Sponges are the oddballs of the animal kingdom. Some scientists classify them as protists. Well, I would put them in the protist kingdom simply because they lack true tissues. But that's my opinion. But most animals have, with the exception of the sponges, have true tissues. And of the animals with true tissues, there are those with 2 tissue layers and radial symmetry. That goes together. And then we have the animals with 3 tissue layers and bilateral symmetry. Those are the bilateral animals. And of the bilaterals, we have protostomes and deuterostomes. First opening's the mouth, first opening's the anus, and 2 other divisions. We're going to ecdysones and lophotrochozones. And we're going to talk about those as we get through this discussion. All right, so this is the animal phylogenetic tree. Animals are believed to evolve from a protist, a colonial protist. And sponges are, well, in this, your textbook considers them animals. All right, they have no true tissues and don't really exhibit any true symmetry. All right, of the animals with tissues, we have the radiosymmetrical cnidarians, those are the jellyfish, sea anemones, and the animals with bilateral symmetry, the bilaterans. The protostomes are broken up into the lophotrochozones and the ecdysones. These are the protozoans, the flatworms, tapeworms, the mollusks, the annelids, the segmented worms. Nematodes are the roundworms, the arthropods, the insects. And then the deuterostomes, the echinoderms, and the chordates. We belong to the chordates. Sponges are placed in the phylum Porifera, which means pore bearing. They have openings all over their body. All right, they're the simplest of the animals. Do not have tissues, usually do not exhibit any true symmetry. For the most part, they live in the ocean. When you see the word marine, think ocean or saltwater. But we do find them in freshwater, smaller versions. Water passes through their bodies, through pores in the body wall, and at the top of the sponge, there's a larger opening called the central canal. And then at the opening, there's an opening to that central canal. All right. Now, the body of the sponge has 2 layers of cells, an outside layer and an inside layer, separated by a layer like jello. Now, the inside layer lining the central canal has these flagellated choanocytes, or collar cells. They help draw the water through the body. And also help absorb food particles, too. Another set of cells called amoebocytes are like little amoebas. They wander around. They produce fibers, that like a type of skeleton called spongin. That's a protein, and also mineralized particles called spicules. And those spicules are like little shards of glass. Sponges typically are not preyed upon. Why? When a fish takes his first bite of sponge, he's going to get a mouthful of essentially glass shards. Fish may not have much in the way of brain, but they're not stupid. They do it once, they won't do it again. They learn. And here's some sponges. This is the opening to the central canal. The central canal is a hollow canal inside. You can see it here, or central cavity. then out the opening, the pores, the inside lining the central cavity. These are the collar cells, the choanocytes, amoebocytes. Sponges are filter feeders. When they draw the water through them, those collar cells or choanocytes filter out the food particles. Alright, adults are sessile. That means they don't move. They're stuck in place. Once they find that easy chair and sit down in it, they don't get out again. Alright, I mentioned to you that spicules, but sponges have also, they produce chemicals. Besides the shards of glass I mentioned earlier, that when they get a mouthful of sponge, they don't come back for more. So one guess about that sponges evolved from early animals, ancestors to animals. Alright, Cnidarians, phylum Cnidaria, jellyfish group. Radiosymmetry and only true tissue layers. An outer epidermis, an inner layer called a gastrodermis. They have a simple digestive cavity, one opening. Mouth serves as anus. And in between the two layers, there's a jelly-filled middle region. Hence, jellyfish. In this group, there's two kinds of body forms, both exhibiting radiosymmetry. The polyp form is sedentary. It has a bunch of tentacles with stinging cells called nematocysts. And we see this in the hydras and sea anemones. And then the medusa, which is a bell-shaped form that floats around. And this is the typical jellyfish. Coral is made up of little polyps which secrete the calcium carbonate that makes up the coral reef. They live in that reef. And the reef also provides homes and shelter and opportunities for feeding for other groups of animals. That is the medusa form. Alright. Jellyfish reproduce sexually, but they can also reproduce without sex. Asexual reproduction by buds. That's a bud right there. There's a bud coming off from the parent body. Right there. Yep, that's a little hydra coming off from the larger parent hydra. And the tentacles around the mouth, there's the tentacles, and they contain those stinging cells or nematocysts. Oh, here's a hydra. That's big for a hydra. A sea anemone. Here's a marine jelly. Cnidarians are predators. They're carnivorous. They will use their tentacles to capture prey and actually push it towards their mouths. Inside the mouth leads to the gastrovascular cavity lined by the second layer, the gastrodermis. The jelly in between the two layers serves as their skeleton, hydrostatic pressurized skeleton, as such, but not a true skeleton. They don't have any organ systems. Diffusion is what moves materials throughout it. Cnidocytes are the stinging cells, the nematocysts. The nematocysts are the actual stingers. The cnidocytes contain the nematocysts. And sometimes the venom is quite toxic to humans, depending on the species of jellyfish. Oh, here's a hydra going to have a meal. Let's watch this. Daphne has a shrimp. A clownfish and a sea anemone. Clownfish is scrounging for food. They don't seem to be stung by those nematocysts. They seem... In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is he's not going to get ate. Alright, the tentacles. These are the cnidocytes. The part that shoots out of there is the nematocyst, the thread, which does the stinging. Alright, let's talk about the bilateral animals. We're done with the radial animals. The flatworms belong to the group phylum Platyhelminthes. They're the simplest bilaterans in that they do have the 3 tissue layers, but no body cavity. They live just about anywhere. Some are parasites, such as the tapeworms and the flukes. The others are free-living, the planarian worms. They're not parasites. And they have a head. Well, the flatworms, some flatworms do, such as the planarian worm. They have eye spots. They have a brain. The mouth is on the underside of the body. They have a pair of nerve cords, and they exhibit the bilateral symmetry as you see here. We have 3 groups of flatworms. The free-living flatworms, the planarians, the one I was showing you the picture of. So they can tell the difference between light and dark. They can respond to light. And they do have a sense of smell. They do respond to chemicals. They have a simple brain and a pair of nerve cords. They too have a gastrovascular cavity inside of them. They have a simple digestive system, one opening. No digestive organs as such, but they don't need all that complexity either. Flukes are another group of flatworms. They're parasites. They have a very complex life cycles that involve 2 or more hosts involved. The tapeworms, like the flukes, are parasites. They inhibit the digestive tract of vertebrates, and there's different species. They have a ribbon-like body with repeated units called proglottids. The scolex is the head end. It has suckers and hooks, so it hooks into the wall of the digestive tract. No mouth, no digestive tract. They don't need it. You do all the digestion and they absorb all the nutrients, so that's how they work. Now the proglottids, those repeating units, are full of eggs, and they're hermaphroditic, and they fertilize themselves. The scolex is the head end. That's where you have the suckers in the head. They hook into the wall of your intestine. There's a close-up of that baby. Ew. And the body is ribbony, made up of repeating units, reproductive structures. All right, phylum Nematoda, roundworms. Very diverse group, some of which are parasites, but not all. Some are parasites on animals, others give plants problems, and some are just free living. They're all bilateral. They have 3 tissue layers. The outside tissue is covered with a cuticle. It's like a skin, like your skin. They don't have a skeleton, but the inside body is filled with fluid. We call this, and it supports them. It's a hydrostatic skeleton. And also, by diffusion, it circulates nutrients. They have a complete digestive tract, a mouth and an anus. There's about 25,000 species of nematodes, and maybe more. And they have mapped out the entire genome of one group, of one species. Humans are parasitized by nematodes. There's about 50 different species. So, here's a roundworm. If you look at a drop of pond water, sometimes you'll see them swimming around in it. Compared to everything else, they're huge. All right, we're going to look at embryonic development. All right, 4 cells, time lapse, speeding it up. All right. Sped up many different times. All right, what do we got here? They develop fairly quick. It takes some hours, but still, that's pretty quick. There, the mouth, the anus is over here somewhere. This is a free-living nematode. That's a dog heart full of heartworms. That's why if you have a pooch, this is what happens if you don't put them on heartworm preventative. This is what blocks the heart. Dog dies, and when they open it up, ugh, it's gross. Mollusks, phylum Mollusca. Their body plan consists of a muscular foot, a visceral mass, mantle. They have a circulatory system of sorts. They do have a type of heart, blood vessels, but most of them have an open circulatory system where the blood is not entirely enclosed within a network of blood vessels. The blood, or hemolymph, as it's called, is pumped into the body cavity and circulates throughout that, distributing nutrients and oxygen and all that. And then they have nothing in the way of blood pressure. And another feature, and they don't have teeth, but they have a structure called a radula, which is like a file. Instead of biting, it scrapes their food into smaller particles. This is a mollusk. The mouth, radula, the foot, this is the visceral mass, and then this mantle, which secretes a shell. Some mollusks lack the shell, others do. They don't have it as a larvae. The shell only shows up in the adult form. Mollusks have separate sexes, male and female, and separate bodies. And many marine mollusks have a larval form called a trochophore, which has cilia, and then it will develop into the adult. Alright, the basic groups of mollusks. The gastropods is the largest group. These are the snails and slugs. They have a single shell, fresh. They live just about anywhere. They can live on land. They use their mantle as a lung. And they have a shell. Now, slugs don't have the mantle and the shell. Now, sea slugs have these extensions that serve as gills. And one group, a type of sea slug, is a nudibranch. There's your nudibranch here, and that's a terrestrial snail. Which get into your garden. The next group of mollusks are the bivalves. They have two shells, the clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. The shells have two halves. They're hinged. Most of them are sedentary. It means they stay in one place, and they just, as the food goes by, suspension feeders, they just filter out the food. Cephalopods, squids, octopi, chambered nautiluses. They're serious predators. They're fast moving. They have big brains compared to the rest of them. And they do have very good sense organs. Their vision is as good as yours and mine. Now, only one group of cephalopods has a shell as such. That's the nautilus. The squid has a small internal one, and the octopi doesn't have one at all. Now, squid they can shoot water out this opening called a siphon, and they like a jet engine for the water. And yes, they have giant squid. Live in deep, where it's dark water near Antarctica in the Southern Ocean. The chambered nautilus, the octopus. Phylum Annelida, segmented worms. Segments are repeated body parts, repeated body structures. They have a nervous system with a brain and a ventral nerve cord on their ventral surface, bottom surface, instead of the top. And they have a closed circulatory system. The blood stays within blood vessels. I'd mentioned that mollusks, and not just mollusks, but arthropods, have an open circulatory system. Except for the cephalopods, they have a closed system, like the earthworm. In the open system, I mentioned the blood is pumped through vessels into open body cavities, and it returns back to the heart at a leisurely rate, and they have nothing really in the way of blood pressure. But a closed system, you do have some type of blood pressure going on. A giant earthworm, yeah, they get big down under. Alright, they have a brain, a ventral nerve cord, 5 pairs of pumping vessels that serve as hearts. They have a dorsal blood vessel and a ventral blood vessel. Each of the segments contain a pair of organs called nephridia, which are like little kidneys. They get rid of waste, maintain water balance. the segments are partitioned off and they're filled with fluid, which functions much like a skeleton. We call it a hydrostatic skeleton. The muscles, two muscle layers, can push against it, much like how your muscles push and pull against bone. Same thing. All right, annelids are found in terrestrial, but they're also found in the ocean. There's three groups: the earthworms, the polychaetes, and the leeches. Earthworms are good for the soil. And when they poop in it, they put fertilizer in it. Let's look at this insect. Earthworm, I mean. My bad. They have two sets of muscles, a circular and a longitudinal. And little bristles. Have you ever gone? When as a boy, I used to go and collect earthworms for fish bait to go fishing the next day. I'd do it at night after dark. I'd wet the lawn, and they'd come out for air, and I'd sneak up on them and grab them. And yes, with those little bristles, they can actually hold into the ground. They don't want to come out. Polychaetes, these are the marine annelids. They have bristles, but they also have fleshy appendages, and they have them. They can actually, some of them can bite you. They're called sandworms. Yeah, sandworms bite. Then there's the leeches, the blood sucking. They're blood suckers. They secrete an anesthetic when they bite and an anticoagulant. But once they suck up what they need, they drop off. They don't carry disease. I've never heard of the leech carrying any type of disease. They just get their meal. You know, they're not so bad. And medicinal leeches are now used in modern medicine. Let's suppose you lost a limb, but they were able to reattach it. Well, at the reattachment point, they will literally attach leeches to suck up the blood and excess blood and fluids, reduce the swelling and inflammation there where they reattach, and increases the likelihood the reattachment will take. So they're not all bad. They're doing good here. Arthropods. More species. That's the largest described number of species, most of which are insects. There are 1 million species of arthropods. Crayfish, lobster, crabs, barnacles, spiders, ticks, and yes, the insects. In terms of evolution, most successful. Why? Segmentation. Their exoskeleton, they have their skeleton on the outside, chitin. So when you step on an arthropod, it goes crunch. Well, that's the chitin. And jointed appendages. The term arthropod means jointed foot. All right. Open circulatory system, exoskeleton. However, for an arthropod to grow, periodically it has to molt, shed its exoskeleton, shed the old skeleton, and replace it with a new one. All right, so basic arthropod body plan is head, thorax, and abdomen. And then sometimes they can be fused together. Alright, in the lobster, the head and thorax are fused into a structure called the cephalothorax. And the abdomen, the head end with the sense receptor, eyes, antennae for smelling. They use antennae to smell. Alright, the mouth parts for feeding, and the first set of walking legs is the pinchers or chillipeds. Then behind that, 5 pairs of walking legs. And they have these swimmerets for swimming. You can see the segmentation. Horseshoe crab, which has actually got more in common with a spider or a tick than it does with what we consider to be a crab. There are 4 groups of arthropods: the chelicerates, of which spiders belong to, scorpions. Chelicerates refer to their mouth parts, chelicerae. In spiders, they're modified into fangs to inject venom. Alright, the chelicerates, for the most part, are terrestrial. Scorpions do their work at night. They go out at night. They're typically not seen during the day unless they're under something. The spiders make webs. Mites, yeah, cause allergies. They're not disease causer, but they do trigger your allergies. The African yellow leg scorpion, the black widow spider, the dust mite. Alright, the second group are the millipedes and centipedes. How do you tell them apart? The number of jointed legs per segment. Centipedes have 1 pair, millipedes have 2 pairs. Millipedes are herbivores. Centipedes, they like to eat flesh. This is your 2 pairs. This is a millipede. Gentle millie. And centi. Yes. They can get long. Yeah, I once saw a centipede. Had to be 30 down in Texas. Had to be that long. At least 30 centimeters. Crustaceans, with the exception of the pill bugs, are aquatic. Crabs, shrimp, and insects. We'll talk about those next. There's a ghost crab. Barnacles attached to the hulls of ships and dock pilings. Of all the identified animal species, 3/4 are insects. And there's maybe a lot of species down in the tropics we haven't come across yet. Insect body plan. Head. 3 distinct body parts. Head, thorax, abdomen. 3 sets of legs and wings. There's some that are wingless. And tends to be 2 pairs of wings, except some. Insects are the most successful of the arthropods. Skeleton segmentation, flight. A waterproof cuticle on the outside of the exoskeleton, and a complex life cycle. Some of them exhibit complete metamorphosis, egg, larvae, pupae, adult, and then there's incomplete metamorphosis where the larvae resemble the adults, except they don't have wings. They only have wings in the adult form. And the thing about the complex life cycle is the larvae forms concentrate on feeding, the adult forms concentrate on reproduction. So there's a division of life duties. Alright, I mentioned to you about metamorphosis. Most of the adults undergo complete metamorphosis, in which the larvae look nothing like the adult form. Incomplete metamorphosis, the larvae resemble a miniature adult, but they don't have wings, or they can't reproduce. In complete metamorphosis, the larvae looks nothing like the adult. They go into a pupa state in which they transform from the larvae into the adult. In the incomplete, they grow, undergo a bunch of molts, and end up as an adult, but there's no pupal form. All right. As we talked about pollination earlier, angiosperms and has a unique relationship with mostly insects, but there is other animal pollinators. All right, it doesn't show the beetle egg, the larvae, the grub, pupal, the adult Goliath beetle, or rhinoceros beetle. It doesn't show the egg here, but here's the larvae, the pupal stage, and then the adult. All right, the insects have a modular body plan, so each segment. So the adult body is formed by embryonic segments identical, but each segment develops independently of the other. This is under the control of control box or homeotic genes. And the genes, they turn on and turn off, and that determines the structure. Insects have a head, antennae, those are for smelling, that's their nose. Mouth parts, and different groups of insects have different types of mouth parts. Thorax, the wings and the legs are attached to the thorax. The spiracles, the openings for respiration are in the abdomen. All right, I mentioned to you insect mouth parts. There's different types for different insects. Grasshoppers like to chew up your plants, so they have chewing. Mantids are predators. Mantids eat other insects. Houseflies tend to lap fluids up, but some of them can suck your blood. Mosquitoes belong to the fly group, Diptera. They have piercing and sucking mouth parts. Aphids are mosquitoes on plants. All right, I mentioned to you insects have 3 pairs of legs. They can walk, they can jump, they can grab things, as in the case of the praying mantis. They can dig, and yes, they can swim. Dragonfly larvae, nymphs, live in the water. They can swim, and they're ferocious predators as larvae. All right, wings. Dispersal, escape from getting chowed down on. Wings are in addition to the legs, and yes, flight has evolved a couple times. Flight evolved in the insects and in the mammals separately. And insects have ways to protect themselves and to camouflage themselves. The walking stick, the katydid looks like a leaf. The caterpillar. Oh, you take a look at that. You see there, you think that's a snake. Well, it's not. It's just a head. It's actually the tail end of the hawk moth caterpillar. But take one look at that. You're going to go, oh! And you'll probably get away. Or the owl butterfly. We call this mimicry. That will stop the predator in this trap. Huh? By that time, it gets away. All right, we're done with the insects. We're done with the protostomes, by the way. Now on to the deuterostomes. Phylum Echinodermata, spiny skinned animals, sea stars, sand dollars, sea urchins. They can be sessile or slow moving. Interesting thing, as adults are radial symmetrical, but the larvae are bilaterally symmetrical. So we call this reverse metamorphosis. So echinoderms are classified as bilateral animals. Well, they start out that way, but they end up as radially symmetrical adults. Interesting. They all have an endoskeleton of carbonate plates, calcium-containing plates, under a thin, spiny skin. And they have a water vascular system. They pump water through these canals. They use these tube feet like vacuum cleaners. And yes, you can chop them up into pieces, throw them over the board into the water, and they just grow back. I went fishing in the ocean once. All I caught were sea stars. I'd pull it up, and there it was sucking up my bait. I just put them back in the water. They were just, I couldn't blame them. I mean, hey, I was giving them, hey, free meal, come take. And that's what they did. Can't blame them. They're just doing their job. And here's the body. They have a complete digestive tract, unlike the jellyfish. They have a mouth, and anus is at the top. But typically, because what they do is they regurgitate what they don't digest. They don't really use the anus. It's there, but they really don't use it. And there it is attacking the clam. Interesting thing. They will attach to both sides of the clam using their tube feet as vacuum cleaners, and then they're going to pull. When the clam tires out and they open it up a little bit, they're going to do something that you're going to think is gross. They don't have teeth, so they evert their stomach. They push their stomach out through the mouth into the clam. And then they just digest it that way. And then when they're done with the food, they suck their stomach back in. Sea urchins have little spines. They're herbivorous. Little spines that can stick into you. There's other types of sea stars, brittle stars, sea lilies, and sea cucumbers, which are a delicacy of Chinese cooking. I had it once. Not bad. Phylum Chordata. That's our phylum. Chordates. All chordates at one point in their life cycle have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. In us, that's the spinal cord. A flexible supportive rod called the nodal cord, which is replaced by our backbone during our embryonic development. Pharyngeal slits. And a muscular post-anal tail. Humans have a tail. There's just not much of one. Now, vertebrates, animals with a backbone, represent only one part of phylum Chordata, or one group of chordates. There are chordates without a backbone. Those are the tunicates and lancelets. And they keep their pharyngeal slits in the adult form. Now, the adult tunicates look nothing like the larvae. We call them sea squirts. They're sessile, they attach to a surface. The larvae look like a minnow or a tadpole. Lancelets are minnow-like, but they don't have the mouth, or they don't have the you'll see what I'm talking about. This is the adult sea squirt. This is the larvae. The larvae show all 4 chordate characteristics. They lose a couple of them in the adult form. This is the larval tunicate. I take that back. This is a lancelet. Yeah. And it stays, the adult form resembles the larvae form. They don't have a backbone, but they have a nodal cord. They do have a mouth, but no teeth, no jaws. That's what I was trying to say. And that's it.